chapters 43, 44, and 45 of The Mirror of the Sea. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Mirror of the Sea by Joseph Conrad. The Tremolino continued. Chapter 43. Anyway, he was perfect, as Donna Rita had declared. The only thing unsatisfactory and even inexplicable about our Dominic was his nephew, Cesar. It was startling to see a desolate expression of shame veil the remorseless audacity in the eyes of that man superior to all scruples and terrors. "I would never have dared to bring him on board your balancelle," he once apologized to me. "But what am I to do? His mother is dead, and my brother has gone into the bush." In this way I learned that our Dominic had a brother. As to going into the bush, this only means that a man has done his duty successfully in the pursuit of a hereditary vendetta. The feud which had existed for ages between the families of Cervoni and Brunaschi was so old that it seemed to have smouldered out at last. One evening Pietro Brunaschi, after a laborious day amongst his olive trees, sat on a chair against the wall of his house with a bowl of broth on his knees and a piece of bread in his hand. Dominic's brother, going home with a gun on his shoulder, found a sudden offence in this picture of content and rest, so obviously calculated to awaken the feelings of hatred and revenge. He and Pietro had never had any personal quarrel, but as Dominic explained, all our dead cried out to him. He shouted from behind a wall of stones, "Oh, Pietro, behold what is coming!" And as the other looked up innocently, he took aim at the forehead and squared the old vendetta account so neatly that, according to Dominic, the dead man continued to sit with the bowl of broth on his knees and the piece of bread in his hand. This is why, because in Corsica your dead will not leave you alone, Dominic's brother had to go into the maquis, into the bush on the wild mountainside, to dodge the gendarme for the insignificant remainder of his life. And Dominic had charge of his nephew with a mission to make a man of him. No more unpromising undertaking could be imagined. The very material for the task seemed wanting. The Cervonis, if not handsome men, were good sturdy flesh and blood. But this extraordinarily lean and livid youth seemed to have no more blood in him than a snail. Some cursed witch must have stolen my brother's child from the cradle and put that spawn of a starved devil in its place, Dominic would say to me. "Look at him. Just look at him." To look at Cesar was not pleasant. His parchment skin, showing dead white on his cranium through the thin wisps of dirty brown hair, seemed to be glued directly and tightly upon his big bones. Without being in any way deformed, he was the nearest approach which I have ever seen or could imagine to what is commonly understood by the word monster. That the source of the effect produced was really moral, I have no doubt. An utterly, hopelessly depraved nature was expressed in physical terms that, taken each separately, had nothing positively startling. You imagined him clammily cold to the touch, like a snake. The slightest reproof, the most mild and justifiable remonstrance would be met by a resentful glare and an evil shrinking of his thin, dry upper lip, a snarl of hate to which he generally added the agreeable sound of grinding teeth. It was for this venomous performance rather than for his lies, impudence, and laziness that his uncle used to knock him down. It must not be imagined that it was anything in the nature of a brutal assault. Dominic's brawny arm would be seen describing deliberately an ample horizontal gesture, a dignified sweep, and Cesar would go over suddenly like a ninepin, which was funny to see. But once down, he would writhe on the deck, gnashing his teeth in impotent rage, which was pretty horrible to behold. And it also happened more than once that he would disappear completely, which was startling to observe. This is the exact truth. Before some of these majestic cuffs, Cesar would go down and vanish. He would vanish heels over head into open hatchways, into scuttles, behind up-ended casks, according to the place where he happened to come into contact with his uncle's mighty arm. Once, it was in the old harbour, just before the Tremolino's last voyage, he vanished thus overboard to my infinite consternation. Dominic and I had been talking business together aft, and Cesar had sneaked up behind us to listen, for, amongst his other perfections, he was a consummate eavesdropper and spy. At the sound of the heavy plop alongside, horror held me rooted to the spot. But Dominic stepped quietly to the rail and leaned over, waiting for his nephew's miserable head to bob up for the first time. "Oh, hey, Cesar!" he yelled contemptuously to the spluttering wretch. "Catch hold of that mooring hawser. Charon!" He approached me to resume the interrupted conversation. "What about Cesar?" I asked anxiously. "Canallia! Let him hang there," was his answer. And he went on talking over the business in hand calmly, while I tried vainly to dismiss from my mind the picture of Cesar steeped to the chin in the water of the old harbour, a decoction of centuries of marine refuse. I tried to dismiss it because the mere notion of that liquid made me feel very sick. Presently Dominic, hailing an idle boatman, directed him to go and fish his nephew out. And by, Cesar appeared walking on board from the quay, shivering, streaming with filthy water, with bits of rotten straws in his hair, and a piece of dirty orange peel stranded on his shoulder. His teeth chattered. His yellow eyes squinted balefully at us as he passed forward. I thought it my duty to remonstrate. "Why are you always knocking him about, Dominic?" I asked. Indeed, I felt convinced it was no earthly good, a sheer waste of muscular force. "I must try to make a man of him," Dominic answered hopelessly. I restrained the obvious retort that in this way he ran the risk of making, in the words of the immortal Mr. Montellini, a demnition, damp, unpleasant corpse of him. "He wants to be a locksmith," burst out Cervioni. "To learn how to pick locks, I suppose," he added with sardonic bitterness. "Why not let him be a locksmith?" I ventured. "Who would teach him?" he cried. "Where could I leave him?" he asked, with a drop in his voice, and I had my first glimpse of genuine despair. "He steals, you know, alas! Pata Madone! I believe he would put poison in your food and mine. The viper!" He raised his face and both his clenched fists slowly to heaven. However, Cesar